Well, it's so good to have you here. There are many of you that are watching this webinar and joining us today. It's going to be a wonderful program, and we invite you, as always, to ask questions along the way and to be an active participant in this webinar. So today we're going to learn about the state of our oceans, which is a huge topic, but we have really awesome experts here, Tom Dempsey and Jonna Wilson, who are going to give us a really inspiring presentation. And I am sure they are up for any question that you might throw at them. So please do think of your questions and put them in our Q&A function in the webinar as we go along. My name is Liz Harvey Roberts. I've been with you, I think, for almost 25 of these webinars now, and it's always a pleasure. So I am the Chief Development Officer for the California chapter of the Nature Conservancy, and I live here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I am a California native, and I love our oceans. I think growing up in California, you really grow up with oceans. And I am a beginner scuba diver. I came to that a little bit later in my life, but I love it. There's a whole world under the ocean, and it's really awesome to explore. I also just love the beach and walking on the beach and running with my dogs on the beach and just enjoying the sound of waves. And I know from our chat function that that's a lot what your experience is too. There's just a peace and serenity around the ocean. Okay, well, we're going to get started. So before we actually get to the presentation, we have a bit of a poll for you. So we're asking you, how long does it take for the equivalent of one blue whale's worth of plastic? So we're talking about the weight of a blue whale to enter our ocean. And so if you would just enter that into our poll, and we'll see where you land. Okay, well, hopefully you've had a chance to weigh in on, pun intended, weigh in on this poll. And let's see, 8 minutes. That is the correct answer to this question. So you are all very wise. And we often find that in these webinars that many of you are really experts in the subject matter that we are discussing for the day, which is awesome. So we're so glad you're here, and we're going to get started with the presentation. So we are lucky to have Tom Dempsey with us. He is the director of our California Oceans program. And we're also lucky to have Jonna Wilson with us. So he is our lead scientist for the California fisheries program. And he's our lead scientist for the program. So we have two experts with us, and without further ado, I think that Jonna is going to start us off, and he's going to join us again for the Q&A portion. So Jonna, let's meet you.
Thanks, Liz. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I am sitting right now in Santa Barbara, California, with my wife and two young boys. And I'm really excited about today's event, primarily because it's rare that we get the opportunity here at the Nature Conservancy to showcase the diversity of challenges that our ocean is facing, but also the breadth of solutions that our team is frankly pioneering to ensure that our oceans are healthy. And really, I couldn't be more proud to introduce Tom Dempsey today because one, he's our Oceans Program Director, but two, he's just got a wealth of experience. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to Tom to hear him introduce these issues to us today. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks, Jonna. Thanks, Liz. As was said, I'm the director of the Oceans Program for TNC in California, and I'm so excited, as Jonna is, to join you all here today and talk about this important topic. So without further ado, let's head out to space and get some perspective. This cloudy blue marble is our home. While astronomers estimate there are 700 quintillion planets in the universe, this beautiful, strange rock floating in space is unique from all other known planets for one reason: oceans. Life exists on Earth because the planet is covered by water, more than 70% of the Earth's surface today. From the earliest human societies and onward, we have been fascinated by the ocean. by its beauty and bounty, its power and possibility, its proximity, and its profound otherness. While cultures around the world have thought about and engaged with the ocean in radically different ways across human history, oceans matter to all of us. And without healthy oceans, we cannot have a livable planet, and we will not have a future as a species. The ocean is quite literally the Earth's primary life support system. Oceans support some of the most diverse and abundant ecosystems on the planet. Coral reefs teeming with life, to towering kelp forests providing nursery habitat and forage for countless species, to deep ocean trenches, miles below the surface. Altogether, oceans support more than 1 million species, many of which are still largely unknown to science. Oceans make our weather and our storms, and they're not only important to the rhythms of nature and marine species, they provide essential benefits to people too. Oceans provide protein for more than 3.1 billion people worldwide. That's about 4 out of every 10 humans on the planet today. More than 200 million people rely on fisheries for their livelihoods, and fisheries generate over $130 billion annually. Nearly everything that we buy, use, and wear comes to us via the global shipping industry. Think about that for a minute. Think about everything that you've eaten today, the clothes you're wearing. Look around the room that you're in at the furniture and technology. 90% of all of it came to you in a shipping container. But even more fundamentally, oceans make the very air that we breathe. The oxygen in every other breath we take comes from photosynthesis that occurs in the sea. And the oceans play a central role in absorbing as much as half of the carbon that we've emitted since the Industrial Revolution, storing more than 50 times what's absorbed by the atmosphere. So as I said, the future of humanity depends on the health, resilience, and abundance of oceans. But all is not well with the world's oceans. For much of human history, the ocean has been thought of as infinite, essentially limitless in its ability to provide for us. People couldn't imagine that it was possible to catch too many fish, or that human activities could push a marine species to extinction, or that ever-increasing pollution could truly impact the health of the world's oceans. But we certainly know better now. Humans have had a devastating impact on our oceans through centuries of overharvesting, habitat destruction, and pollution. Despite all that oceans provide for us, we have too often treated the oceans with a fundamental lack of respect. And now these threats are being exacerbated by the acceleration of the climate crisis. Oceans are warming at alarming rates. Over the last 30 years, we've seen a 450% increase in the rate of warming compared to the prior 30 years. As a result of all these changes, ocean species and ecosystems have been pushed to the brink of collapse. Ocean biodiversity has declined, and by the end of this century, scientists estimate that more than 50% of the world's marine species may be threatened with extinction. Globally, we've lost a total of 1/3 of some of the most important marine and coastal habitats, from coral reefs to kelp forests, from mangroves to seagrasses. We're eroding the very foundation of healthy oceans. Around the world, 1 in 3 fisheries are overexploited, meaning that we're harvesting faster than the population can replenish itself. This is driving many harvested marine species into decline. Additionally, scientists estimate that fishing vessels pull in 9.1 million tons of bycatch annually. Vulnerable marine species like sharks and dolphins and turtles that are caught unintentionally and often don't survive. Taken together, commercial fisheries around the world today have a footprint 4 times larger than that of land-based agriculture. Once considered so vast and so wild, just 13% of ocean waters are now considered true wilderness, free from primary human stressors. But really, no part of the ocean is free from the impacts of human actions, not anymore. While the oceans play a critical role in absorbing 1/3 of global carbon emissions, the vast amounts of carbon humans have created is now beyond what the oceans are capable of absorbing, leading to warmer temperatures and shifting currents and acidification. And now many of us are also waking up to the horrible global challenge of plastic pollution. A staggering 8 million metric tons of plastics enter our ocean every single year, and that is on track to quadruple by 2050. At this point, plastics have been found in every part of the ocean, from surface to seafloor, from pole to pole, from coastal waters to the deepest marine trenches. And all that plastic is already having serious impacts. Now, I just wanted to pause here for a minute. All that is a lot to take in. The breadth and scale of challenges to ocean health worldwide are daunting. And it's difficult, at least for me, to step back and take a clear-eyed look at all of it without a deep sense of sadness and shame, even anger. As I said, the future of humanity relies on healthy oceans. And when I look at all that we have done, are doing, when I look at the choices that people have made and continue to make, the problems we now have to solve, it can be overwhelming. Yet when I think about what allows the Conservancy to advance our mission in a changed and changing world, I always come back to our core strength. It's actually why I work at TNC. And that is, despite these admittedly formidable challenges, we reject hopelessness. We're convinced that we can build nature solutions that work for people too. And that's not based on wishful thinking or naive optimism. It's based on our science and the fact that TNC is one of the only organizations on the planet with a track record of solving planet-sized problems. Since we were founded in 1970, since we were founded 70 years ago, we've worked closely with a wide range of partners, bringing cutting-edge science and technology to build win-win solutions. We know we can solve these problems, and our science has given us a roadmap for turning the tide and restoring abundance to our oceans. We can still shape a better future for the world's oceans, for our planet, for ourselves, and for generations to come. We can and must change course now, and we must do it together. Our team's vision is that the diversity and benefits of California's ocean and island ecosystems are restored and protected, and that the conservation solutions we develop here in California can scale to have a global impact. To get there, we need to be creative and bold and relentlessly focused. We need to harness the power of new science and technology and markets, engaging an enormous range of partners, from small-scale harvesters to community leaders, resource managers, elected officials, entrepreneurs, and some of the largest corporations in the world. The California Oceans Program is focused on developing new approaches for incentivizing the protection of ocean ecosystems and restoring degraded habitats, enhancing the sustainability of ocean resource use, and addressing the plastic pollution crisis. While there are certainly a number of important issues we could be working on, we focused on these areas because they're among the most urgent issues facing oceans, because they touch down here in California in really important ways, and because in all of these cases, we see exciting potential for TNC's model of innovation, of partnerships, and problem solving to deliver real results and catalyze systemic change. Yet the window we have to shape our future is closing. Science tells us the coming decade will be the most important in history for the fate of our planet. We need to go bigger. We need to go faster. And we need to be constantly expanding the coalition of partners. Today, I'm going to tell you about 3 ways our team here in California is doing just that. I'll talk through the specific challenges we're facing, how we're tackling them, and what it could mean for the planet if we succeed. So let's start with the foundation of healthy oceans that I mentioned, marine habitats. Kelp forests are probably the most important marine habitat that most people have never heard of. These towering ocean forests stretch from the Arctic Ocean to the southern tip of Tierra del Fuego, along nearly 1/4 of the world's coastline. Taken together, kelp forests cover more than 360 million acres, more than 5 times the footprint of coral reefs. And like those coral reefs, kelps are the essential foundation for healthy oceans, critical to functioning ecosystems and supporting thousands of species around the world, from invertebrates to fish to seals and whales. They're among the most diverse systems on the planet and rival tropical rainforests in terms of the incredible amount of carbon they're able to fix. Moreover, kelp forests support billions of dollars in annual revenue, from fisheries production to recreation and tourism. But the world's kelp forests are in trouble. A combination of climate change and human stressors like overfishing and pollution are leading to global kelp forest loss. And these declines aren't occurring evenly all around the world. Instead, we've seen catastrophic loss, a near complete disappearance of massive kelp forests occurring in just a few years in Japan, in Norway, in Australia, and along the west coast of the United States. Along California's north coast, a roughly 400-mile stretch from San Francisco to the Oregon border, following the warm water events and the decimation of the last sea star predators a few years ago, we've seen the explosion of the purple urchin population, growing to 60 to 100 times prior levels. These urchin have devoured kelp and led to the loss of more than 96% of the kelp forest in the region in less than 10 years. This has already had enormous ecological and social and economic impacts for the region. So what does that look like in the water? These events have turned a vast swath of the North Coast from thriving kelp forests seen here on the left to unproductive, low diversity urchin barrens. Imagine a largely empty parking lot at the bottom of the ocean, stretching for miles and miles in every direction. Without action, these barrens can persist indefinitely, with long-term impacts to the countless kelp-dependent ocean species, to the human communities that rely on kelp forests, and to the health of the entire planet. Now, there are kelp restoration efforts underway in a number of places today, but the majority of these projects are less than 1/10 of a hectare in size. That's about the size of an Olympic swimming pool, and just can't meet the scale of this challenge. So how do we go about resetting these devastated ocean forest ecosystems at scale? Our team's working with leading researchers to accelerate the recovery of the critically endangered marine predator species, the sunflower sea star, in a first of its kind captive breeding program. And rebuilding a resilient predator community is an essential step in protecting kelp forests in the long run. But we need to reduce purple urchin populations by a lot, and we need to do that right now. So we're looking to build a market-driven solution to remove purple urchins, one that can provide a profit motive to incentivize divers and harvesters to collect urchin at the volumes necessary for scaled restoration. In short, people largely created this problem, and we're going to need people to help solve it. So you might be asking, well, what's the problem? Why aren't commercial urchin harvesters and processors embracing this opportunity on their own without us? After all, humans have been harvesting urchins around the world for centuries, often eating the gonads or uni as a premium seafood product. There are two major challenges. First, because the urchin are starving, having devoured the kelp and eliminated their primary food source, they're in poor condition, and they don't have the uni which supports the seafood market. So no one is paying for urchin. Second, even if the urchin were in perfect condition, only about 20 to 25% of the total urchin population is large and mature enough to be viable as a seafood product. The rest are just too small. But to achieve our restoration goals, we need to reduce the densities of all size classes of urchin, not just the large ones. So what do? We're focused on building two complementary market solutions. The first is something called urchin ranching, which is a creative and scalable approach of harvesting urchin from barrens, then feeding them up in tanks on land before selling them into existing uni markets all around the world. And we see some real potential here. The second is to develop non-seafood product pathways that can absorb the vast amounts of unranchable urchins, mostly the small and immature urchins. This could include utilizing urchins as poultry feed or in fertilizers or in aggregates for landscaping. And our team is pursuing all of these product pathways working with partners. We see an important opportunity to harness the capacity and creativity of the private sector to help us achieve our conservation mission. We're working with partners to launch and scale a robust restoration-aligned urchin harvest sector in California that reduces urchin densities to levels that can help recover kelp forests at seascape scales. Doing so will have immense benefits for the many marine species and human communities that rely on kelp. And it will also represent a powerful proof point, underscoring the role, value, and potential impact of well-designed market solutions to contribute to the recovery of marine habitats. If we're successful, we can catalyze a new era of ocean recovery and restoration, one that can scale to the threats faced by other ocean habitats, including coral reefs, mangroves, and seagrasses. So now shifting gears to fisheries. As I mentioned earlier, around the world, fisheries represent a significant threat to ocean health and to the very survival of key marine species. But also by virtue of their importance to people, they represent a unique opportunity. Because more than a third of fisheries are over-harvested or declining due to poor management, $80 billion in potential fisheries revenue is lost annually, along with countless jobs and huge amounts of sustainable protein. So you don't have to be a bleeding heart conservationist to care about sustainable fisheries. You might just care about food, or about money, or about jobs in your community or your state or your country. And this reality, this potential alignment of interests, is essential to building solutions for unsustainable fisheries. For more than a decade, TNC has been at the forefront of doing that all over the world. Through this work, we've learned a ton about the underlying challenges and necessary enabling conditions for making durable change. And we've learned that while there are certainly important differences across fisheries and geographies that are essential to understand when you're building effective solutions, there are also some shared challenges that are just as relevant for large, high-revenue fisheries in the US as they are for small subsistence fisheries in places like Indonesia. Among the most important of these is the existing lag between information and action in the management of our fisheries. In many ways, this is at the very root of unsustainable fishing in so many places around the world. So what do I mean? To ensure you're harvesting a marine species sustainably, you need to be able to gather high quality, timely information on the health of that species. And then you need to be able to turn that information into effective management actions. But a staggering 90% of fisheries currently operate with no scientific assessment of the health of the underlying resource. Without this information, it is simply impossible to set sustainable harvest limits. It's like driving down the highway with your eyes closed. It might work for a while, but it will not end well. For too long, fisheries managers, conservationists, and community leaders have tried to address this issue by scaling traditional approaches to fisheries management, and it simply hasn't worked. These scientific stock assessments, which try to estimate the size of a given population, often take years to complete and are just too expensive to implement at the scale and frequency necessary to support effective management. We need a better way. Fortunately, TNC and our partners have been hard at work designing innovative solutions that can meet the information challenges facing so many fisheries. Powerful new tools that harness new science and cutting-edge technologies to deliver much needed data cheaper and faster to support better management. Among these is something we call Poseidon, a revolutionary software tool we've built that translates digital images of catch into action-ready data sets to inform sustainable fishing limits. Instead of trying to estimate how many fish are in the sea, as other approaches do, Poseidon is a tool to gather, organize, and use length measurements of harvested fish and invertebrates. Recent science shows that tracking length measurements can be an effective way to keep tabs on the health of a given population and to set management measures. Too few big fish or too few small fish in a sample can indicate that overfishing is occurring. In many cases, the traditional stock assessment process that I mentioned earlier routinely takes 3 to 5 years and tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Poseidon can replace those approaches and allow a community group to gather much needed stock health information and use it to guide action literally overnight, setting adaptive management measures in almost real time and virtually for free. This tool is a potential game changer for thousands of fisheries around the world. Looking forward, our goal is to deploy Poseidon in a large fraction of the thousands of unmanaged and unmeasured fisheries around the globe. We're working to scale the tool in fisheries in Mexico, Hawaii, French Polynesia, and Micronesia. We believe we can fundamentally change how we gather information to help improve the management of fisheries. In doing so, we can take an important step to the more sustainable harvest of marine resources, securing healthier and more resilient oceans and more abundant and secure food systems for billions of people around the world. The third and final story I wanted to share today is about plastics. For the last 3 years, my team and I have been trying to understand whether and how we as an organization working with partners could make a significant impact in addressing plastic waste. Early on, we realized how important it is to understand and unpack the different types of plastic waste to really drive change. Let me show you what I mean. When people think about the plastic pollution crisis, they often think about things like water and soda bottles washing up on the beach, birds trapped in six-pack rings, or making nests out of brightly colored trash. They think about turtles choking to death on plastic bags that they mistake for jellyfish. And of course, all these things are happening. They're all part of a horrible, complicated reality of the global plastic waste picture. But what many people fail to realize is that the vast majority of pieces of plastic that make their way into our oceans are actually microplastics, smaller than 5 millimeters. And a large and growing fraction of these come from the clothes that we wear and wash every day. Tiny synthetic threads called microfibers that pull free and end up in the air, in our wastewater, and ultimately in nature. A recently published analysis showed that over the last decade, 6.1 trillion pounds of microfibers were released globally, and it's getting worse. These fibers are getting into ecosystems where they absorb even more toxic pollutants, are eaten by all sorts of critters, and have serious impacts on a host of species and on the safety of our food systems. As part of our effort to figure out how we can best help address the global plastic crisis, we started to dig into this often overlooked issue of microfiber pollution. We realized from the start that we can't just focus on one part of the problem. We had to take a life cycle approach to addressing it, just like we need to do in other aspects of confronting the plastic crisis. For microfibers, this means understanding and reducing waste in the manufacturing and processing of these materials, during the consumer use stage, and during their disposal. As we started to work on this, one of the first things that jumped out to us was how little was known about microfiber leakage from the textile processing and manufacturing sector. So we worked with our global partner, Bain Consulting, on a project to try to answer some fundamental questions about what we started to call the pre-consumer part of the life cycle of these materials. We asked, what are the trends in the creation and sale of synthetic textiles worldwide? What are the steps in the manufacturing process that contribute the most to microfiber loss? What's the scale of this problem globally? And what does the solution set look like to mitigate these flows? So what do we find out? We found out that the pre-consumer loss, mostly in the form of effluent from textile mills, is as big a problem as all the shedding and loss from laundry and everyday use. And without action, we'll see these flows increase by more than 50% in the coming decade. The good news is that shovel-ready solutions exist. Tools that we can use today to save water and remove the vast majority of microfibers from effluent. These solutions can work for nearly all the textile mills all over the world. And not only are these solutions feasible, they can actually improve the profitability of these mills. So what's standing in the way? We found that there's a broad lack of issue awareness among the suppliers, little understanding and knowledge about the existing solutions, and no urgency on the part of textile mills to make the changes necessary to reduce microfiber release. That said, we also identified some exciting opportunities to catalyze the wholesale uptake of these solutions throughout the supply chain. We're now building and strengthening global partnerships with some of the largest brands, corporations, and coalitions in the textile sector. Our team's working with them to accelerate the pace of targeted research, increase the ambition of their corporate commitments to address this issue, and creating the incentives, resources, and support for the suppliers to make the changes on the ground to help reduce microfiber pollution. Of course, this work can't be viewed in isolation. We need to build end-to-end solutions across the life cycle of these materials, from fabric design to fiber capture to disposal. But together, led by science and advanced in close partnership with industry leaders, we believe this work can help keep an enormous amount of microfibers out of our lands, rivers, and oceans, protecting countless species, as well as the health of human communities for generations to come. As I think about all these efforts, from restoring kelp forests at scale using new market solutions, or improving the sustainability of our fisheries by harnessing technology and working with local communities, or leveraging partnerships with major corporations to address sustainability in their supply chain, I'm often struck, as you might be, by how different these initiatives seem. And in some ways, that's true. But at their core, they are all bold, science-driven, and collaborative efforts aimed at solving some of the biggest challenges facing ocean health and resilience here in California and around the world, at building that more sustainable future that we all want to see. And they all center on building solutions that work for nature and for people. That's what we do here at the Nature Conservancy. We have an ambition to change the world, and we've shown that it's possible. But we need to act now. We need to dramatically increase the pace and scale of ocean conservation. And with your help, we will. Thank you.
That was so amazing, Tom. Thank you so much. I just want to acknowledge that when we say that we're addressing the state of the oceans, that's a huge topic. And Tom is representing what we do from California for the Nature Conservancy, and understanding that California is really leading on a lot of these issues for the Nature Conservancy. So I think we had a window into what that looks like from Tom. And we are going to be joined by Jono also in this Q&A session. So between the two of them, I think they can really tackle any question that you have for them. And I also want to encourage you, there have been a number of questions that have come through the function on Zoom. If you have any additional questions that we don't get to during this presentation, we will address them in writing. It takes us about a week to get to all the questions, but be patient, we will. And we share that with everybody who attended. So if you want further detail about what we were talking about today, you will get them in that kind of Q&A written document. So just to rest assured. So I want to get to the questions. So Arthur Lieberman said, the thrust of the talk has been to attribute ocean problems to human use. Aren't there natural changes or ones that our science has not yet been able to explain that are happening in the oceans to change or impact ecological systems? For example, the die-off of the sea stars as one. So
yeah, I can start, John. Feel free to hop in, but I think it's a great question. And I think from time immemorial, there's always been dynamics at play, natural dynamics in the ocean. It is a dynamic place with complicated ecosystems and interactions between species, range shifts, and species interactions that change over time. So that is absolutely true. And by virtue of human actions, some of the ones that we called out, both direct and indirect, we've seen those changes really manifest. And so we've seen warming waters and acidification lead to increased outbreaks of epidemics, like what happened with the sea stars along the West Coast. So they are interrelated. The ocean ecosystem is dynamic and changing. It was never fixed in time, but we are seeing human-driven actions impact the oceans at really significant scales.
I'll just add to that, Tom, thanks for that, is that we've recognized that there are natural processes that might underlie some of these challenges. And so in every solution that we are developing and pioneering, we recognize those challenges. And for example, in the sea star example, it's not our goal simply to put sea stars back out into the environment. We'd like to find those sea stars that are heat resilient, that can withstand those diseases that are impacting their populations naturally. And by identifying those particular strains or genetic individuals, we hope that we could build resiliency into that population moving forward. We think about those sorts of solutions in everything we do, and we partner with academic institutions, other organizations, to really be at the forefront of all of that scientific thinking.
Okay, thank you to both of you. Okay, so Katie is asking, what is TNC doing to help save our coral reefs and ensure that we have coral reef ecosystems for future generations?
Yeah, great question. And as all of you know, we don't have any tropical coral reefs here in California, but the Nature Conservancy overall has been working on coral conservation and restoration for decades around the world, looking to address local stressors, to manage reef fisheries much better, and then also to do restoration. Over the last year or so, we've been exploring how California and our team can contribute and add value to these global efforts of protecting coral in the face of these catastrophic declines worldwide. And we focused on two primary elements of that challenge. One is, how do we radically increase the amount of resources that are available to support coral restoration and conservation work? So we're looking at new financial tools and mechanisms, and we can talk more about that. The second is, how do we significantly decrease the per unit cost of coral restoration? We absolutely need conservation and management efforts, but we know that we can't protect and save coral in the way that we need to without proactive and scaled restoration. But right now, the per hectare cost or the per area cost of coral restoration is just too high to scale. So we've been looking at ways that we could add what California does best in terms of innovation and disruptive thinking, new business models, to actually think about how we could support doing coral restoration at much larger scales. One of the ideas that we're exploring is leveraging technology and automation to build next generation, high production, automated coral farms that could produce hundreds of thousands of coral to support restoration efforts and projects all around the world. So that's an ongoing and growing body of work for us, but we're looking for ways that we can contribute to all the great work that the Conservancy and partners and many others are doing around the world on that topic.
Wow, that's exciting. Okay, getting to the next question, we're getting back to purple urchins. Gary is asking, after the purple urchins ruin the kelp, what do they live on?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so after they eliminate their primary food source of kelp, they actually just pick away on algae and sort of small life on the reef. And they can live there in, as I mentioned, poor body conditions. So they're not doing well, but they can live in that state for a really long period of time. They basically go into a low energy, almost zombie-like state. But the problem with that is they persist on those urchin barrens. Those urchin barrens don't transition back to thriving kelp. And if there were any little sort of kelp seedlings on the bottom, they would be immediately devoured by this just massive abundance of purple urchin.
Whoa, it's like an army. Okay, hey, let's talk about otters because they're cute. So any plans to get otters out there? I believe they love to eat sea urchins.
I get this one a lot, and I love to answer it because it's really, really interesting. So as many folks know, otters were almost completely eliminated from the West Coast decades ago. And there are currently no otters up on the North Coast, and there haven't been for quite a while. The last remaining predator was this sunflower sea star. That's what was keeping the urchin populations at lower levels. Now, you might imagine we could just go and transplant 300 otters next weekend up to the North Coast, and they'd look at all those urchin on the barrens and say, oh, this is fantastic. The problem is that otters actually eat the same part of the urchins that we do. They eat the uni. And so because those urchin are in poor body condition, the otters, those 300 otters that you brought up to the North Coast, would look around, realize that that was not an abundant food source, and they would head back to Monterey Bay or wherever they came from and wouldn't help you recover kelp forests. That said, otters play an incredibly important role in stewardship of thriving kelp forests. So they will eat urchin off of abundant, thriving kelp forests. And so I think they're a long-term part of what will be kind of a more robust and resilient predator community up on the North Coast, but they can't actually help us recover or restore those kelp forests.
Okay, well, let's hope that we get there. We'd love to see them out there. All right, so aquaculture, we have a number of different questions around aquaculture. So one, can we do it in a way that is ecologically beneficial? And also just what can we do with food sources for even feeding cattle and such on land? Is there a way to grow kelp and seaweed, et cetera, so that we can have a sustainable source and that is ecologically beneficial?
I can take this one quickly.
Okay.
Well, or not so quickly. It's a complex topic. And to be honest, when aquaculture is mentioned, it requires dissection. It requires really thinking about what you mean by aquaculture. There's land-based aquaculture. There's aquaculture that occurs out in the ocean. There's aquaculture for finfish. There's also aquaculture for mussels and oysters and other animals like that. And depending on what you're talking about, there are both pros and cons. And so we at the Nature Conservancy are working on aquaculture. And so our focus right now is to really identify those locations throughout the globe, in California, but also throughout the globe, where we can site aquaculture in a manner that provides benefits to nature. And then we're also building best practices for those aquaculture farms so that they can provide those co-benefits to nature as well. We call that restorative aquaculture. And so there's a whole bunch to unpack within restorative aquaculture that I think is really beneficial to the future of food production. I think the thing, though, that really excites me the most about aquaculture, and a particular form of aquaculture, is what we call conservation aquaculture. And that's really where we are utilizing the techniques and skills of the aquaculture industry to grow depleted and vulnerable and threatened species in captivity and put those organisms out into the ocean, like we're doing with the sunflower sea star, to restore and recover ocean ecosystems at scale. And so we think that because of the impacts from a changing climate, that our current way of managing resources through effective fisheries management or simply protecting areas is just not going to be enough. There needs to be active intervention. And we think that the aquaculture industry can be a really strong partner in helping us, the conservation community, to really achieve restoration and recovery at scale.
Okay, thank you. So we have I'm going to go to one that is a little bit of a long question if you stick with me. So someone's asking, my gut reaction is that this effort is too hyper-focused on trying to fix a problem, but not get to the root of what caused the problem. Do you all focus on tackling the issues that actually cause the habitat destruction? If you try and recover habitat and species, but do not tackle what's causing the destruction, how do you ensure that the habitat restoration stays restored and protected? And then specifically about the starfish again, how will they survive in the wild again?
Yeah, great question. So we are a massive organization with a number of teams doing great work. So with regards to some of the ultimate causes of the changes that we're seeing and the declines that we're seeing in natural systems here in California and around the world, a lot of that is frankly driven by carbon emissions and by the climate crisis. We have teams both here in California and at the federal level working on climate policy, working on solutions, and trying to thread the needle where we can both set and ultimately achieve really ambitious carbon reduction commitments and targets. And that's a really important piece of work, and we support those teams. We work closely with those teams. Our focus here in California is on mitigation and adaptation in the face of a changing ocean and a changing world, frankly. So with regards to both kelp and sunflower sea stars, I think it really is important. We are eyes wide open about the importance and necessity of thinking about resilience, thinking about thriving, resilient kelp forests in the oceans as they are now and will be in the future. And that means warmer, more acidic, and more frequent storms. And so we are thinking about how to, and doing some of the foundational work on genetics, on traits of resilience for both kelp and sunflower sea stars, to be thinking about how we can help assist in the natural increased resilience for those species, so as to ensure that our restoration efforts are both successful and enduring.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to switch gears to talk about microplastics. So Michael's asking, can bacteria be engineered to consume microplastic pollution?
Yeah, there has been a ton of really exciting lab work and innovation in that space. And I think there is some real promise there. The questions for me are about scalability and feasibility. And so what we have focused on principally right now is moving upstream and turning off the tap in terms of plastic waste. And that's the same for microfibers and microplastics. It's also the same for the macroplastics, the packaging and waste that we all interact with in our everyday lives and in our communities. So we're trying to push upstream to actually achieve what we call source reduction, using less plastic, creating less plastic. But at the end of the day, I think we are going to need interventions across what we call the life cycle of plastic, from creation to consumption to disposal and ultimately recovery from natural areas. I think there are some exciting advances in biotechnology and in genetics and working with bacteria and other things. I think it's too soon to tell whether those solutions can be scalable. And as I said, we're principally focused on trying to reduce the source and reduce the flows of plastic into natural systems.
Okay, thank you. And Mark is asking, just to come back to a high level for humans, is it safe to consume seafood, given all we've heard?
Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead, John.
Yes, it sure is. And I think there are, there is, as Tom said earlier, a needle to be threaded there. There definitely are some concerns, but I think there's a lot of information available to the consumer right now with regard to what is safe to consume. The Monterey Bay Seafood Watch Program does a really great job on not only telling us what is sustainably fished and harvested, but also whether or not there are concentrations of certain chemicals, such as mercury, in the fish we consume. And so by adhering to those sorts of practices and standards through those seafood guides, I think we can make informed decisions as consumers.
Awesome. Thank you, Jono. Okay, so a little bit about seagrass, because we know that's an important part of habitat. And what is TNC doing to address seagrass protection?
Yeah, so a lot of things, again, around the Conservancy, habitat restoration efforts around the US and in many other places. Here in California, our primary seagrass interactions has been working with shellfish growers around the siting and monitoring of seagrasses. You might know folks that grow oysters and clams in our coastal waters. That can have a significant impact on seagrass beds that we need to understand and track. So we've worked with a number of leading growers in that sector to build new solutions to actually help them monitor and evaluate the impacts of their farms to inform both siting and mitigation, and ultimately in support of their permitting. So what we're hoping to do is ultimately scale those solutions so that every shellfish operation along the California coast and perhaps the West Coast is utilizing some of these new monitoring techniques to ensure that we're siting those operations effectively, we're minimizing the extent of impacts and damage, and that we're monitoring those over time.
I think I've been to Hog Island, where we were doing some of that research, which was a very yummy field trip, should anyone want to go again. Okay, so let's go to Poseidon, because we haven't given enough attention to Poseidon. So what is the main incentive for communities to use Poseidon, and what is the pitch to fisheries, large and small, to use this tool?
I'd be happy to take that quickly, Tom. I think it's actually pretty simple. A lot of these communities, they rely on sustainably managed fish for their livelihoods, for their economies in their local communities, but also up. And so what they've experienced over the past years, over the past decades, is a decline in their resources through overfishing, but also through other natural causes. And it's not good for their bottom line. It's not good for them putting food on the table. And so they often come to us for help and guidance in better managing these fisheries. Tom mentioned earlier that there's an $80 billion global gap in essentially money left on the table from poor management. And so what that means is that when you fish a population too hard, you can't harvest as many organisms out of that ocean. And if you can relax your harvest in the short term, that population can rebuild. And much like interest in a bank account, can provide you with enough resource to harvest off of the top to maintain a healthy environment, but also to put food on your table. And so those fishing communities, those groups, even national and state organizations, fisheries organizations, are coming to us for help, for guidance and support. And so we offer a whole suite of tools, from Poseidon to FishPath to mechanisms that can help communities and organizations build entire fishery management plans from the ground up, so that they can maintain their resources in a sustainable manner in perpetuity.
Awesome. And I'm going to just drill down, because there's been a couple questions about this too. When we say that we partner with communities, or we partner with the university, or we partner with a local organization, can you just give a little more specificity to what that looks like? Anyway. Because I think we can all fill in a blank, but I don't know if it's accurate.
Yeah, no, it is. It will come as no surprise that the partnership with a local community in Hawaii or in Mexico around a fisheries project looks very different than the partnership at the core of research, like what we do with, say, the University of California, Santa Barbara around microplastics, which also looks very different from partnership with large corporate entities. So there, and we have reams of other partners as well. So I think in general, it's hard to kind of to simplify because there's such a broad range and diversity. That said, what we try to do, partnership is kind of baked into the DNA at TNC. And what we do is, I think we're strongest with knowing what our North Star is, and that's the conservation impact. Being really self-aware about what we bring to any of these issues, whether it's cutting edge science, technology, transactional expertise, organizational expertise, policy or advocacy expertise. So we're being very clear about what we bring to a given issue. And then we go to any of those partners and we talk about what their priorities are and what their North Star is. And I always describe this as kind of a Venn diagram. In each of those cases, you're looking at a Venn diagram, basically overlapping circles. So we know that with a major textile brand, we and you know, them and us, we don't have to see everything the exact same way. It's about where we intersect, where we have a shared area of focus and an opportunity to collaborate, where we can contribute something, they can bring expertise, resources in a different perspective, and that's where great partnerships happen, and that's the same across that broad range of partners.
Love it, the Venn diagram. Makes sense. Thank you. I'm going to go to a completely different topic now, which is about offshore wind. So Michael's asking, what about the offshore wind farms? How do you expect them to impact ocean ecosystems?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we're getting increasingly engaged in offshore wind build out and siting. And it's critically important that we do that with a thoughtful, comprehensive process. But our science team and the energy team at the TNC California chapter has done some really robust science and modeling around the fact that we frankly cannot achieve our really ambitious renewable goals here in the state without offshore wind. It's going to need to play a role in advancing our commitments in that regard. So it's not really whether or not, it's where and how, and ensuring that we have an inclusive process that elevates and centers trade-offs in terms of the impacts to other ocean users or indigenous communities, coastal users, coastal access, et cetera, but also thinks really critically about the ocean impacts and the nature impacts of siting some of these things. So moving forward, as these comprehensive statewide planning processes actually sort of build some momentum and start to gather some speed, we'll be in the room, we'll be working to bring our science and our expertise from all the renewable siting work we've done in the desert and all around the country, and bring all those skills and all that expertise to that process to try to navigate to the best outcome that allows us to achieve our offshore wind and our renewable energy goals more broadly, but also to do that in a way that protects and prioritizes nature.
Thank you, Tom. And that is a great lead into the last question that we're going to be able to take today. And for those of you who are on as guests, we've done a lot of science behind the California Energy Program to really map out the path to 100, which is what we call it, which is 100% renewable energy. So if you're interested to learn more about that, we would love to share that with you, but that's part of what Tom's alluding to. So the last one really is a lead into our State of the Cities, which is our next program next month. But one person is asking, years ago, there was discussion about stormwater runoff from the LA basin into the ocean. I haven't heard anything on the subject in years. Can you bring us up to date? We've been in a drought for a long time, but eventually it will rain hard again. We hope. Okay, so who would like to take that?
Jono, do you have a perspective on that? So we have not, we have a great freshwater and cities program that has been prioritizing stormwater issues for years. In our oceans program, the team that Jono and I are part of, we haven't really focused on stormwater runoff because we have another team here at the Conservancy. So what I can commit to doing is just drilling down and working with that team to answer that question in a more robust way in a follow-up email. But yeah, we just, I'm not expert on that, and I don't want to speak to it given that I don't have much to say.
Jono, are you cool with that?
Sounds like a great answer, Tom. Thank you.
All right. Well, what a nice lead in to next month. And we'll make sure that the city's program knows about this question so they can also address it live. So thank you so much for joining us. Tom, Jono, it's always a pleasure to be with you. And thank you to all our guests who joined us today. Please fill out the survey. Let us know how you enjoyed today's program. And again, we will get answers back to the questions we couldn't address in about a week's time, with a few days added on to that. And we would love to just hear how you've enjoyed these webinar series and really what you would like in the future, because we are planning to wind down as we get able to get outside and see you all in person. So if these have been a valuable part of your experience with the Nature Conservancy, we would love to know that. Okay, and with that, have a wonderful day for the remainder, and we hope to see you next time. Bye.